The 7-year-old boy in a wheelchair tried to hold back his tears as his father's wife humiliated him with cruel words. But before she could say something even worse, the housekeeper appeared at the door and shouted, "Don't do that!" Her shout echoed through the house. The millionaire, who had just arrived, stood frozen at the sight. The mansion sat on top of a quiet hill at the edge of the city, surrounded by perfectly cut hedges, long driveways, and more windows than any normal house should have. From the outside, it looked like something out of a magazine. But inside, the place felt frozen. Not cold like winter, just ... lifeless. Like nobody had laughed in there for a long time. Like the air itself was holding its breath. Michael Hayes, the man who owned the house, walked through the hallway just like he did every morning. His shoes clicked against the shiny floor with the same slow, careful rhythm. His face didn't show much. Not anger, not sadness, just that tired kind of empty you only see in someone who's been through a lot and hasn't found a way out of it. He wasn't the type to talk much. Not anymore. Not since the accident. Not since his wife died. 2 years had gone by, but Emily's photos still sat on every table, every shelf. Her smile was everywhere and nowhere all at once. And even though her clothes were gone and her perfume had faded, her absence was still louder than anything else. Michael stepped into the dining room where his 7-year-old son Luke was already seated at the table. A caregiver had wheeled him in a few minutes before. The boy didn't look up. He just stared at his plate, pushing a piece of toast with his fork. His legs were still, his eyes were distant, and his face, once full of light, hadn't shown a smile since the day his mum was buried. Michael sat across from him, watching him quietly. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words always got stuck halfway. There had been a time when Luke used to crawl into bed in the middle of the night, giggling and whispering about monsters under the bed. Now, Luke barely spoke at all. Not to Michael. Not to anyone. Breakfast went on without a sound, like most mornings. A staff member came in to collect the plates, giving a polite nod before disappearing down the hallway again. They were all like that, efficient, quiet, distant. Nobody talked unless they had to. The entire house worked like clockwork, but not the kind that ticked loudly. The kind that ticked too softly to hear, but still moved everything along. After breakfast, Michael followed Luke into the therapy room. That was the routine. An hour with the physical therapist, then maybe reading time, sometimes piano practice. Not that Luke played anymore. He used to love it. Now he sat there, fingers curled in his lap, not touching the keys. Michael stood by the door, arms crossed, watching the therapist try to stretch Luke's legs and get him to respond. There was no resistance, but there wasn't any interest either. The boy's face stayed blank, his eyes just blinking slowly, like he was somewhere far away. Michael clenched his jaw and looked away. Every time he saw his son like that, it felt like a punch he couldn't block. After the session, Michael carried Luke to the sunroom, gently placing him on the cushioned chair near the big glass windows. It was his favorite spot before everything changed. The room had warm light and a view of the garden Emily used to care for. Michael sat beside him and tried again. "How about we go outside later?" he asked softly. Luke didn't answer. His hands stayed folded in his lap. Michael waited a few seconds, hoping for anything. A nod, a blink, a sigh, but nothing came. So the silence grew heavier, pressing into Michael's chest like it always did. He stood up, brushed a hand over his son's shoulder, and walked out of the room before the emotion reached his face. He couldn't break, not in front of Luke. Back in his office, Michael sat behind the huge desk, pretending to go through work emails. But he wasn't really reading. He rubbed his temple and stared out the window. His company was doing fine. More than fine. Investments, tech, real estate, it all ran like a machine. He could throw money at any problem, except this one. He leaned back in his chair and looked at a framed photo on his desk. Emily and Luke, 2 years ago. Beach trip. Sand all over the blanket. Ice cream melting in Luke's hand. Emily laughing at something stupid Michael had said. That day felt like a lifetime ago. He swallowed the tight lump in his throat. He didn't cry anymore. He couldn't afford to. A knock on the door pulled him out of his thoughts. One of the staff stepped in. A young man named Todd. Always polite. Always a little too stiff. "Mr. Hayes, sorry to bother you. You asked me to look into hiring a new housekeeper." Michael nodded. "Yes. Anyone promising?" "There's someone scheduled to come by later today. 35. Good references. Nothing fancy." Michael gave a short nod. "Let me know when she arrives." He went back to staring at the window, not expecting much. Housekeepers came and went. Some stayed a month, some only a few days. Most left on their own. One had said the house felt too heavy. Another just didn't come back after lunch break. Later that afternoon, Michael heard the front door open. Voices in the entryway. A woman's voice. Soft but firm. Not too cheerful, not fake, just real. Todd walked her into the living room and called for Michael. He came down the stairs slowly, and the first thing he saw was a woman standing near the piano. She was dressed simple. Jeans, blouse, hair pulled back, no jewelry, no makeup. She didn't look nervous, just alert, like she was paying close attention to everything. "Mr. Hayes, this is Grace," Todd said. Michael nodded, giving her a quick once-over. "Nice to meet you," Grace said. Her voice didn't try too hard. She didn't smile too much. It was like she wasn't trying to impress him, which was rare. "You've worked with children before?" Michael asked. Grace nodded. "I have, and I've taken care of houses bigger than this, though this place is quiet." Michael blinked. "Too quiet?" She gave a small shrug. "Feels like a place that forgot how to be a home." That comment could have offended him, but instead, it hit something deep. For a second, he didn't say anything. He just looked at her, then nodded. "We'll try a trial period. A few days. Sounds fair." Grace looked around the living room again, then down the hall. "And the boy?" "Luke," Michael said. "My son," she nodded. "Would it be okay if I met him?" Michael hesitated. Most people waited to be introduced. She just asked. "Straightforward. He's in the sunroom," he said. "But don't expect much. He doesn't really." She nodded again, already moving toward the hallway. Michael followed, curious. Most people tiptoed around Luke like he might break. Grace walked in, stopped a few steps from the chair, and crouched down so she was eye level with him. Luke didn't turn his head. She didn't push him to. "Hi, Luke," she said quietly. "I'm Grace. I'm here to help take care of things around here, if that's all right with you." Luke stayed still. "I heard you like the sun," she added. "Me too. Makes things feel a little better, doesn't it?" Still nothing. But Grace didn't seem bothered. She stayed right there for a minute longer, then stood up and walked back to Michael. "He's a strong kid," she said. Michael tilted his head. "You got all that from silence?" Grace gave a half smile. "You can tell a lot by the way someone holds their shoulders. And he didn't flinch when I spoke. That's something." Michael watched her walk back to the kitchen with Todd, and for the first time in a long time, something small shifted in the air. Not much, but just enough. Like maybe the silence didn't own the house completely anymore. Grace had only been in the house for a few hours, but something already felt different. She didn't walk around like she was nervous or unsure, even though the place was huge and spotless and probably worth more than anything she'd ever stepped foot in. Instead, she moved like she belonged there, not in a proud way, but like she understood how to be helpful without making a scene about it. She showed up the next morning early, before anyone asked her to, wearing the same kind of clothes she had on during the interview. Clean jeans, sneakers, a grey sweater that looked like it had been washed 100 times but still looked good on her. Her hair was pulled back again, no perfume, no jewelry. She carried a small bag with just a notebook, a pen, and a bottle of water. Michael didn't say much when he saw her walk in. He gave her a nod from across the kitchen while stirring his coffee. He hadn't slept well. Luke had a bad night. Woke up twice crying but never said why. Michael didn't know how to comfort him anymore. Sometimes he just sat next to him in silence until the kid went back to sleep. Grace didn't ask for a tour. She just looked around and figured things out. She started by wiping down the kitchen counters, checking the fridge, seeing what needed to be thrown out. The fridge was packed with expensive food nobody ever ate. She made a mental note to go simpler next time. The kind of meals people actually touched, not just looked at. By mid-morning, she had already done laundry, organized 2 of the linen closets, and cleaned out the hallway closet that had a broken vacuum and piles of wires that looked like nobody wanted to deal with. The staff watched her from a distance, not sure what to make of her. She didn't bark orders. She didn't complain. She also didn't try to be friends right away. At one point, the cook, Marie, walked in and caught Grace scrubbing the baseboards in the back hallway. "You don't have to do that, you know," Marie said, raising her eyebrows. Grace looked up, wiped sweat off her forehead with her sleeve, and smiled. "Yeah, I know. But it was bugging me." Marie smirked a little and walked off. That was the beginning of a quiet kind of respect that would grow between them. Around noon, Grace stepped into the sunroom again. Luke was sitting there just like the day before, staring out the big window. The sunlight hit the side of his face, making his hair glow a little. His chair was angled toward the garden, but his eyes didn't really focus on anything. Grace didn't go right up to him. She didn't make a big entrance. She walked in, sat on the floor a few feet away, and pulled out a small kid's book from her bag. It was something simple. A story about a dog that keeps getting lost in his own backyard. Nothing deep, Nothing sad. She didn't ask for permission. She just started reading in a soft voice. Not over the top, not babyish, just calm, like she was reading to pass time. The first few pages, Luke didn't even blink. But when she got to the part where the dog mistook a bird bath for a pond, his eyes flicked slightly toward her. Grace didn't react. She kept reading. Halfway through the book, she let herself laugh once. Not loud, just a short chuckle when the dog tried to make friends with the turtle and ended up getting sneezed on. That was when she saw it. The tiniest twitch in Luke's mouth. Not a smile. Not yet. But something. Like his face had forgotten how to move and was trying to remember. She finished the book, closed it, and set it beside her. Not bad, she said to the air. Bit of a weird dog, though. Luke stayed silent. He looked at her now, just for a second, and she saw it. He was watching. Later that day, Michael passed by the sunroom and noticed Luke sitting a little straighter in his chair. His head was tilted, eyes alert. Grace was nearby, folding a small blanket. She didn't look at Michael, just kept doing what she was doing. That night, after Luke had gone to bed, Michael stayed in the kitchen longer than usual. He poured himself a glass of wine, even though he barely drank anymore, and sat at the counter. Grace came in to finish wiping down the stove. She glanced at him but didn't say anything. "You don't seem too fazed by all this," he said after a while. Grace looked up. "What do you mean? The house, the size, the silence, the pressure." She thought for a second. "It's just a house. I've worked in louder ones. I've worked in smaller ones that felt a lot heavier than this." Michael gave her a look. "Heavier how?" She shrugged. "Depends who's in them." He nodded slowly and looked down at his glass. Grace finished cleaning and reached for her notebook. "I'm gonna make a grocery list," she said. "You mind if I change up a few things?" "Change how?" "Less imported cheese. More actual food." Michael smiled faintly. "Go ahead." She started writing, quietly humming to herself. It wasn't a song he knew, but it sounded like something she'd sung 1,000 times to herself when no one was listening. The next morning, something even smaller happened, but it mattered. Luke was in the kitchen before breakfast, being wheeled in by the caregiver like usual. Grace walked in behind them and set a small bowl in front of him. Oatmeal, not the kind that comes in fancy jars with toppings, just plain warm oatmeal with a tiny bit of cinnamon. "Thought you might like this," she said casually. "Smells better than cold toast anyway." Luke didn't look at her, but after a few seconds, he picked up his spoon. Just once. Just one bite. Then he set it down again. But he didn't push the bowl away. That was something. Michael saw it from across the room. He didn't say anything, but he looked at Grace a little longer than usual that morning. Later that day, Grace was in the laundry room when Todd came in. "You're really settling in," he said, kind of surprised. Grace shrugged. "I like to be useful. You're not nervous around Mr. Hayes?" "No. Should I be?" Todd chuckled awkwardly. "Most people are. He doesn't talk much. Keeps to himself." Grace looked at him and said, "He's just tired." "Tired of what?" Grace folded a towel and said, "Everything." That night, Luke looked toward Grace when she walked into the room. Just a glance. Just a second. But that second was enough to tell her that something was starting to shift. She didn't rush it. She didn't try to get more out of him. She just gave him that same soft look and said, "Hey Luke, good to see you again." And that was it. No big moment. No dramatic music. Just small pieces starting to come together without anyone saying it out loud. Something real had arrived. Grace wasn't trying to be special. She wasn't trying to fix anything or make people look at her like she was some kind of hero. She just showed up every day and did her job, but she did it differently. Not louder, not faster, just with her full attention. That's what made the difference. By the end of her first full week, the house already felt lighter. Not cheerful, not joyful, but lighter? Like someone had finally cracked open a window after a long time and let some air back in. She started including Luke in small things without asking permission. She didn't wait for Michael or the caregivers to tell her what she could or couldn't do. She didn't cross any lines either. She just knew what to try. One afternoon, she rolled a small table into the sunroom and placed it next to Luke's chair. Then she brought in 2 bowls, a spoon, some flour, sugar, and a few apples. She stood in front of him and said, "We're making a mess today. That cool with you?" Luke didn't answer, like always. But he didn't look away either. Grace peeled the apples while talking to herself like he was already in the conversation. "You know, I tried making this recipe last month and burned the bottom. Didn't tell anyone. Just scraped it off and served it with whipped cream like nothing happened. That's the secret to life, by the way. Cover the burnt parts with whipped cream." She dropped the peels into a trash bowl and started slicing. "Now, I know I should be using one of those fancy cutters, but I don't trust anything with blades unless I'm the one holding it." Luke watched her. Not obviously, not like he was staring, but he wasn't zoning out either. He blinked slower, his head tilted just a little, the way kids do when they're curious but don't want you to know it. When she poured the sugar and cinnamon into the bowl, she paused. Want to help me stir? She didn't expect an answer, but his hand moved almost without thinking. His fingers curled around the spoon handle. She didn't reach for him or make a big deal out of it. She just let him hold it. He didn't stir, but he didn't let go either. Grace smiled to herself and gently pressed her hand next to his, guiding the spoon around the bowl once. There we go, look at that. We're practically chefs. After a few turns, Luke's hand slipped off the spoon, but Grace didn't say anything. She just kept stirring. Then she added the dough and scooped it into little ramekins. That night, after dinner, she made sure one of the small apple crisps went straight to Luke, with a little note next to it that said, "From the chef." When Michael saw it, he looked over at Grace, who was wiping down the counter. She didn't look up. She just kept wiping, humming something soft under her breath. Michael stared at his son, who slowly picked up his spoon and took one bite. But he ate it without being asked. The next day, Grace brought in a deck of cards. "You ever play Go Fish?" she asked. Luke blinked. "Well, I'm teaching you anyway," she said, shuffling the cards and laying them out. She played both hands herself, but talked through the game like it was real. "Do you have any eights?" She looked at his pretend hand. "You do? Hand it over." I knew it. By the third game, she thought she saw something. She leaned in closer. Luke's lips twitched. Not a smile. Not quite, but close. He was watching the cards. And when she acted surprised and said, "You beat me again? What are you, a magician?" He made a tiny noise. A small breath. Just the softest huh from his chest. Grace paused. She didn't want to scare it off, but her eyes lit up. "I'm gonna have to start charging you rent if you keep winning like this," she said. Luke looked down at the cards and blinked again, but the muscles around his mouth didn't go flat this time. They stayed right where they were, like they were remembering how to smile. By the time Michael passed by the room, Luke had one hand on the card pile, and Grace was pretending to be outraged. "You picked up a king again. You're robbing me blind, man." Luke didn't laugh, but he looked up at her. He looked at her, and that was more than anyone had seen him do in a long, long time. Michael stood in the doorway watching. His eyes stayed on his son, but then drifted to Grace, who caught his gaze for half a second. She didn't smile. She didn't do anything extra. She just gave a small nod like, "See? He's still in there." Michael couldn't speak. Something thick built up in his throat, but he swallowed it down and walked away. Later that week, it happened. Grace was in the backyard with Luke. She'd gotten permission to take him out, just for a short time. The fall weather was perfect. Not too hot, not too cold. The kind of day that makes you feel like maybe things can get better. She laid a blanket out on the grass and helped roll Luke's chair onto the edge so he could face the trees. Then she sat next to him and pulled out a small bubble wand. "I'm pretty sure bubbles make everything better," she said. "Unless you're allergic to soap, which I hope you're not. Are you?" No answer. But his eyes followed her hand. She dipped the wand and blew. Bubbles floated out, catching the light, drifting up toward the sky. She popped one with her finger. Oh no, that one was important. That was the wish bubble. Luke's lips twitched. She blew another one, then another. She let one land on the back of her hand and watched it wobble. You ever try to bite one? It's like chasing air candy. Totally useless, but fun. And that was when it happened. Luke smiled, just for a second. A real, tiny, crooked smile. Grace didn't say anything. She didn't scream or gasp or clap. She just sat there, holding the wand in her lap, acting like nothing happened. But inside, her heart exploded. Quietly, like fireworks with the sound turned off. The next time Michael saw Luke, he was still by the window, but his posture had changed. He looked brighter, more aware. His eyes followed movement. His fingers tapped lightly on the armrest. Michael sat beside him. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "How was outside today?" Luke didn't answer, but he looked at him. Looked, then turned back to the window. Michael stared at him for a long time. He didn't cry, but he wanted to. He wanted to reach over and wrap his arms around his son and say, "Thank you for coming back to me." But he didn't want to scare it away. So instead, he leaned back, let out a long breath, and whispered, "I missed you." And even though Luke didn't respond, the space between them didn't feel as empty anymore. That night, as Grace turned out the lights in the kitchen and headed to her room, she passed by Luke's room. His door was slightly open. She peeked in. He was asleep, his hand resting on the stuffed fox toy she'd left by his pillow earlier that day. She whispered, "Good night, Luke." She didn't expect a reply, but as she turned to walk away, she heard it. A whisper, barely there. Night. Grace stopped. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She just stood there, closed her eyes, and smiled to herself. Morning used to mean silence in that house. Not just quiet, but heavy silence. The kind where people moved around without saying anything unless they had to. Breakfast came and went, with the sound of clinking spoons, and not much else. That's just how it was. But now, little by little, it was changing. Not dramatically, just in ways you might miss if you weren't paying attention. It started with music. Grace came into the kitchen one morning, her phone in her pocket playing a soft tune. Something gentle, kind of jazzy, something with no lyrics. Just rhythm. She set her phone on the counter and kept working while it played, not thinking much of it. But Michael looked up from his coffee like he wasn't sure what he was hearing. She noticed. "You want me to turn it off?" she asked. Michael shook his head. "No, it's fine, she left it on." That same song kept playing in different versions over the next few days. Piano, guitar, slow drums. Sometimes Michael found himself tapping his finger without realizing it. Luke noticed it too. The first time Grace rolled him into the kitchen and the music was playing, he looked toward the speaker and tilted his head. Not confused, just interested. That day, Grace made scrambled eggs and toast. Nothing fancy, just warm and fresh. She made a small plate for Luke with a smiley face drawn in ketchup next to it. She didn't even say anything, just placed it in front of him and winked. Luke looked at it for a long time, then he picked up his fork and took a bite. Michael saw it. He didn't say a word, but he watched everything. After breakfast, instead of heading straight into the therapy room like usual, Grace asked, "Hey Luke, want to help me water the plants before your session?" Luke looked at her, then at the small watering can she held up. It was red, shaped like a little elephant. He reached out for it. She guided his hand carefully, let him hold the handle, and helped him pour just enough water over the leaves. "There you go. So these guys are going to be thriving thanks to you." They did that every morning after that. Just a few minutes, but it became part of the day. Luke didn't always smile, but he was engaged. He was part of something again. Later that week, Grace brought in a box of old picture books. She set them in the sunroom next to a small reading mat she'd laid out. She didn't push it. She just let them sit there. The next day, she sat on the mat with one of the books open and started reading out loud. Once upon a time, in a town where nothing ever happened, a kid found a sock in his cereal box. ... Luke turned his head toward her. He didn't say anything, but when she glanced at him, he was smiling with just his eyes. That night, Michael stopped her in the hallway. "What's with the sock story?" he asked. Grace shrugged. "You ever try reading a regular fairy tale to a 7-year-old who's been through hell? It doesn't work. They don't want dragons. They want weird cereal socks and jokes about turtles in pajamas." Michael chuckled. That was new. He hadn't laughed in months. "Not really." He paused before walking away. "Thank you," he said quietly. She just smiled. "Anytime." Over the next few days, the routine settled in more. Luke had started choosing which shirt to wear in the morning. Grace would show him 2 options, hold them up, and ask, left or right. Sometimes he'd point. Sometimes he'd blink twice for the one he liked. It became their system. She also gave him small jobs. Nothing hard, just little things that made him feel important. "Hey, can you be the official bell ringer for lunch today?" She handed him a small handbell and told him to shake it once when it was time to eat. He did it. No hesitation. When he rang it, the sound echoed through the house, and Michael came downstairs with a look of surprise on his face. Grace nodded toward Luke. "He's in charge now." Michael smiled and gave a small salute. "Yes, sir." That made Luke's lips curl up again. "Just a second, just enough." The caregivers who used to handle all of Luke's daily needs began stepping back a little, just watching. Grace had a way of reading Luke that nobody else had. She didn't overdo it. She didn't talk at him like he was helpless. She let him lead whenever he could. In the afternoons, she brought out small puzzles and laid them on the table in the sunroom. At first, she did them on her own. But one day, Luke reached out and placed a corner piece exactly where it belonged. Grace didn't react too much. She just said, "Nice, you've got the eye." And then they kept going. Michael watched all of this quietly. He didn't jump in, didn't hover, but he was paying close attention. One night, he stood outside the sunroom with a glass of water in his hand and just listened. Grace and Luke were inside, building a small tower with wooden blocks. He could hear her voice. "Nope, that one's too wobbly. You're gonna start an earthquake, kid." A soft giggle followed. A real one. Michael leaned against the wall and closed his eyes for a second. It was the first time in 2 years that laugh had filled the house. After that night, Michael started joining them during certain parts of the day. At first, he just watched from the side. But then one afternoon, Grace looked at him and said, "We need another player for Go Fish. You in?" He hesitated. "Don't worry," she added, "he's already beat me 6 times. You might stand a chance." Michael stepped forward and sat down. Luke looked at him, eyes wide, and then looked down at his cards. Grace dealt the hands, tossed a card at Michael. "No cheating." Michael raised an eyebrow. "I haven't even looked at them yet." Luke smiled. "For real." For longer than a second, that game turned into another part of their day. Go Fish, then drawing. Then Grace brought out an old record player she'd found in the storage closet and played a few old vinyls during quiet time. Luke liked the sound of the crackling, the gentle music. One afternoon, he even tapped along with one hand on the armrest of his chair. By the second week, everything had changed, not in big ways, but in all the small, quiet ones that people don't notice until they stop and look back. Grace came into the kitchen one evening, sat across from Michael, and said, "He asked for apple juice today." Michael looked up. "Actually asked?" She nodded, whispered it. "But yeah." He stared down at his hands. His voice cracked when he said, "I haven't heard him ask for anything in almost 2 years. I know." They sat in silence for a while, both staring out the window, the sun going down behind the trees. Grace looked over at him, not smiling this time, just soft. "He's not gone." He was never gone. He just needed someone to remind him he's still here. Michael blinked a few times and gave her a small nod. His eyes were full but steady. The next morning, Luke was waiting in the sunroom before anyone came to get him. The deck of cards was already in his lap, and that was the day the routine truly became theirs. Michael had always been the kind of man who kept things in. Even before everything went wrong, he wasn't much of a talker. Not about personal stuff, not about feelings. He was the guy who handled things, kept his head down, and made sure life stayed in order. That's how he ran his company. That's how he kept his marriage stable. And that's how he got through the kind of pain that would have broken most people. At least that's what he told himself. But lately something had been cracking under the surface. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in those quiet minutes after Grace left the room. Or when he saw Luke smile, then felt this rush of guilt hit him so hard it made his stomach twist. Or when he found himself standing in the hallway staring at a wall for no reason, just stuck in his own head. The night he finally let it out didn't start any different than the others. Luke had gone to sleep early. Grace was still in the kitchen cleaning up, soft music playing from her phone again, some mellow song with a soft beat and a guitar that felt like it belonged in the background of something real. Michael stood by the window in the living room, drink in hand. He wasn't drinking much, just enough to feel the edge smooth out. He looked tired, like someone who hadn't really rested in years, not just because of sleepless nights, but because his mind never stopped. You could tell by the way he rubbed his forehead like he was trying to hold something in that didn't want to stay there anymore. Grace walked in slowly. Not on purpose. It was just how she moved when things felt quiet. "You okay?" she asked, her voice low but warm. Michael gave a small shrug. "Just thinking." She leaned against the counter, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Dangerous thing to do around here." That made him laugh. A real laugh, short and surprised. He looked at her and shook his head. "You say stuff like that, and I wonder why I didn't hire you sooner." She smiled, folding the towel and setting it aside. "Maybe you weren't ready yet." He didn't answer right away. He looked back out the window, watching the trees sway in the wind. "You want something?" she asked. "Tea? Water?" He paused, then nodded. "Tea sounds good." She made it without saying anything else. No small talk, no pushing, just the sound of the kettle heating, the cup clinking against the counter, the smell of chamomile floating through the air. When she handed it to him, he took it and sat down on the couch. She sat across from him in the chair by the fireplace. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that feels okay, like neither one needed to pretend. After a minute, Michael spoke. "You ever feel like the world just stopped and forgot to tell you?" Grace looked at him. "Yeah, once or twice." He stared at the cup in his hands. "That night, the accident, I wasn't even home. I was on a business trip, Arizona. I was in a meeting when I got the call. I remember thinking it was a mistake. Like someone got the wrong number." Grace didn't speak. She waited. He swallowed hard. "They told me there was a crash. Emily and Luke were coming back from a birthday party. It was raining. Some truck ran a red light. She died on impact." His hands tightened around the cup. His voice dropped lower. Luke was in the back seat. The doctors said it was a miracle he survived. But his spine, it was bad. They didn't even know if he'd make it through the first night. Grace kept her eyes on him but still didn't interrupt. "I got there 6 hours later. And I remember thinking, she's gone. Didn't even get to say goodbye. I had to sit there in a hospital chair and hold Luke's hand while he slept, not knowing if he was going to wake up. I couldn't even cry. I was just frozen." He finally looked up at her. His eyes were glossy, but not spilling. After that, shut everything down. My life, my feelings, my home. I fired half the staff. Didn't want people walking around pretending like nothing happened. I told myself the only thing that mattered now was Luke, that if I focused everything on him, maybe that would be enough. He laughed under his breath, bitter and tired. But it wasn't. I couldn't reach him. Every day I'd try something new, a toy, a therapist, a different nurse. Nothing worked, and I hated myself for it. I hated that I couldn't bring him back. I thought maybe he blamed me. Maybe I did too. Grace leaned forward a little. He doesn't blame you. Michael nodded slowly. Yeah, I know that now. I just didn't believe it for a long time. They were both quiet again for a while. Then Grace asked, "Did you ever talk to anyone about it?" Michael shook his head. "Therapists, sure. Company-required stuff, but no, not really. I didn't want to feel it. I just wanted to move past it. But Luke couldn't, and I couldn't help him until I faced it myself." She sat back, crossing her legs. "Well," she said, "you're facing it now." He gave her a small smile. "Yeah." Another pause. Then he said softly, "You're good with him. Better than anyone I've seen." Grace smiled, but this time it was sad. "I just see him. That's all. He's not a problem to solve. He's a kid who lost his world. That kind of pain doesn't go away, but it doesn't have to stay frozen either." Michael looked down again. His thumb ran along the edge of the cup. "You make this house feel alive again." Grace's face softened. "It's not the house. It's you and Luke. I just helped you see what was still there." He looked at her for a long second. "You ever lose someone?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, a long time ago. It changes you." "Yeah," Michael said. "It really does." They sat there a while longer, not saying much. The tea cooled. The music kept playing from her phone in the other room. Finally, Grace stood up. "I'm gonna head to bed. You need anything?" Michael shook his head. "No, thanks." She walked to the hallway, but before she turned the corner, she looked back at him. "He's getting better, you know. Every day. And you are too." Michael didn't say anything. He just nodded. His eyes stuck to the spot where she'd been standing. He sat there for another hour, alone in the quiet, thinking about all the things he'd been holding in. And for the first time, he didn't feel crushed by them. He just felt lighter. Not healed. Not okay, but lighter. And that was something. The night started with Michael straightening his tie in the mirror, barely recognizing the guy staring back at him. He hadn't worn a tux since the funeral. Honestly, he wasn't even sure why he agreed to this charity event. Maybe it was pressure from one of the board members. Maybe it was because people kept saying things like, "It's good to be seen again and you've got to get out of the house sometime." Or maybe it was just easier to nod and show up than explain why he didn't care about parties anymore. Luke was already in bed when he left. Grace had stayed behind to keep an eye on things. She didn't ask where he was going, but she gave him a kind look before he walked out the door. "Drive safe," she said, adjusting the collar of his coat like she'd done it 100 times. Michael had paused at that. For a second, he almost said something, but instead, he just gave a small nod and walked out. The event was at a fancy hotel ballroom downtown. Music was playing softly, lights were dim, and everyone looked polished and rich and like they hadn't had a real problem in years. Michael walked in, shook a few hands, made small talk, nodded through the usual jokes and business chatter. Then he saw her. At first, it was just a flash of red. A woman stepping away from the bar, red dress catching the light, walking like she owned every eye in the room without needing to ask for it. The kind of woman who moved with purpose, who looked at people like she already knew what they were thinking. Michael didn't mean to stare. He wasn't even sure why he did. But she caught his eye and then she smiled. Not a polite smile, not a fake social one. This was slower, sharper. Like she knew she had his attention, and she liked it. She walked straight up to him, not even hesitating. "I'm Claire," she said, holding out her hand like she wasn't going to wait for him to make the first move. "Michael," he replied, shaking her hand. "I know," she said, leaning in a little. "You're kind of hard to miss." He raised an eyebrow. "You're not in the photos anymore, but everyone still talks about you," she added. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he just gave a small, tired smile. She nodded toward the bar. "Drink?" He followed. They talked for a while. About nothing, mostly. Weather, business, the event. At first, Michael felt stiff. He was out of practice. But Claire didn't seem to mind. She talked easily, laughed at his quiet sarcasm, and didn't ask about his personal life. That was ... unexpected. Most people did. They tiptoed around it or brought it up in soft tones like they were handling a fragile object. But Claire didn't. She treated him like a man, not a tragedy. That caught his attention more than the dress or the smile. They ended up sitting together the rest of the night. She was bold, flirty, but not over the top, confident. Every move she made was smooth. When she brushed his arm while laughing or leaned in to say something close to his ear, it was like she knew exactly what she was doing. Michael found himself relaxing, not completely, but enough. It had been a long time since someone looked at him like he was more than a name or a story whispered at parties. Claire didn't seem afraid of him or his grief. That felt strange, refreshing, even. By the end of the night, she asked him if he wanted to get coffee sometime. Michael hesitated, just for a second. Then he said yes. When he got home, the house was dark and still. He stepped inside quietly, took off his coat, and loosened his tie. He peeked into Luke's room. The boy was asleep, stuffed fox tucked under one arm, breathing soft and slow. Michael stood there for a moment, then closed the door gently. Downstairs, Grace was curled up on the couch with a blanket, reading a book. She looked up when he walked in. "Hey," she said, smiling. "Hey," he replied, his voice quiet. "Go okay?" "Yeah, it was fine." She nodded. He looked at her for a second longer than usual. She looked comfortable, like she belonged there, like someone who wasn't just part of the house, but part of the life inside it. He didn't say anything else. Just walked to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and went upstairs. Grace watched him go. Something flickered in her eyes, but she didn't move. Over the next few days, Michael and Claire started seeing each other. Not every night, not even that often, but enough. Sometimes lunch, sometimes a quiet dinner out. He didn't talk about her to Grace. He wasn't hiding it, exactly, but it felt complicated. Claire was fun. She asked questions but didn't dig too deep. She complimented him, made him laugh, and didn't treat him like a father carrying around a load of pain. Michael liked the distraction. He liked the ease. Grace noticed the change. She never asked where he was going, never pressed, but she noticed the way he shaved closer now, how he checked his phone more often, how his smile had a different edge to it when he came back late. One afternoon, Grace was helping Luke paint in the backyard. He was focused on the brush in his hand, swiping soft green strokes across the paper. Grace looked up when she heard Michael's car pull in. She wiped her hands and turned toward the door just in time to see Claire step out from the passenger side. Red heels, black sunglasses, sharp, stunning, loud in a way the house had never seen before. Grace stood still, watching as Claire walked up to the door like she belonged there. Michael opened it for her. Grace opened the back door before they could knock. Claire gave a quick once-over of Grace. "You must be the housekeeper," she said, smiling. Grace nodded slowly. "And you must be, Claire." She reached out a hand like she was introducing herself to someone beneath her. Grace shook it politely. "Nice to meet you." Claire glanced past her. "Where's the boy?" Grace's chest tightened, but she kept her voice even. "Painting." Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'll go say hi." Before Grace could stop her, Claire was already walking out toward the yard. Michael stayed behind. "She's something," he said quietly. Grace gave him a look. "Not angry. Just come." "Yeah, she is." Michael couldn't read her face. He didn't know if she liked Claire or not. She wasn't giving him anything to work with. Out back, Claire crouched next to Luke. "Hi there," she said sweetly. "I've heard a lot about you." Luke stared at her. No smile, no movement. Claire reached for his painting. "Wow, what is it? A forest? A swamp?" Luke looked down. Grace stepped in quickly. "Luke, I think we're all done for today, huh? Let's get this inside." Luke didn't argue. He let her wheel him back in, quietly. Claire stood and looked around the yard. It's peaceful. Quiet. Too quiet, maybe. Michael didn't respond. Grace didn't say a word as she helped Luke wash his hands and brought him upstairs. That night, after dinner, Claire left early. She kissed Michael on the cheek before going. "We'll talk tomorrow, yeah?" He nodded, watching her walk out. He turned back and saw Grace wiping the counter. "You okay?" he asked. She gave a short nod. "Always." But her face stayed turned away from him. And just like that, something subtle had shifted in the air. Not broken. Not loud, just off. A line had been crossed. Not all the way, but close enough to feel it. And for the first time since Claire showed up, Michael felt unsure about something he couldn't name. Claire didn't wait long before showing up again. 3 days after that first visit, she was back. This time with fresh flowers in her hand and perfume that filled the hallway before she even made it to the kitchen. Grace was cleaning out the pantry when she heard the door open and Claire's heels clicking on the floor like they were announcing her. Michael came down from his office looking slightly surprised, not unhappy, but not exactly expecting her either. "Thought I'd drop by," Claire said, handing him the flowers and giving him a quick kiss on the cheek. Thought this place could use a little color. Michael smiled politely. Thanks. You didn't have to. I know, she said, brushing him off as she looked around the kitchen. But I wanted to. I missed you. Grace walked in quietly and reached for a dish towel. She gave Michael a quick nod, then turned to wipe down the already clean counter. Claire barely glanced at her. Morning, Gina, right? Grace blinked. Claire smiled like it didn't matter. Cute name. Michael glanced between the two women. Grace didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than most words ever could. That afternoon, Claire didn't leave. She stayed through lunch, sat at the table with Michael while Grace served the food, and even offered to help clean up afterward, though she didn't actually do anything. She just stood near the sink, twirling a spoon in her hand and chatting about a new restaurant opening downtown, talking like she already lived there. Luke didn't say a word the whole time. His eyes stayed down on his plate, and his hands barely touched the food. Grace noticed. When she walked him to the sunroom after lunch, she knelt beside him. You okay? He gave the smallest shake of his head. Just once. Barely there. Grace looked back toward the kitchen, her mouth tightening. All right, she said softly. Let's stay out here for a bit. The next day, Claire showed up again, and again the day after that. She brought pastries, commented on how quiet the house always felt, and once even asked Michael if they could open up a few windows to get some life in here. He agreed, though he looked unsure. Grace kept her head down. She did her work. She helped Luke. She stayed polite. But something was shifting, not just in the air, in the rhythm of things. The routine that had helped Luke come out of his shell started to get interrupted. The painting sessions got shorter. The reading time with Grace stopped completely on the days Claire came around. There wasn't room for both. Claire would sit down near Luke and talk to him like he was a guest in his own home. Hi there, she'd say, voice just a little too sweet. Having fun today? He wouldn't respond. She'd lean closer. I brought cookies. Your dad says you like chocolate chip. He wouldn't touch them. Sometimes she'd try to make jokes. Not a big talker, huh? That's okay. I'm not either, unless there's champagne involved. Grace would watch from the hallway, her chest tight. She didn't want to interfere, but she could see it. The way Luke's hands stayed stiff, the way his shoulders tensed when Claire sat too close. One morning, Grace found him already in the sunroom before breakfast. He was curled up in his chair facing the window. She crouched down. You feeling okay? He looked at her. Not sad, just tired. She brushed his hair back with her fingers. Want me to read you something before we start the day? He gave a tiny nod. She opened one of the books they hadn't touched in a while. She read quietly. No voices, no games, just simple words and calm pages. By the time Michael walked in, Luke had leaned slightly toward her, eyes soft and focused. Michael didn't say anything. He watched from the door for a moment, then cleared his throat. I think Claire's coming by later, he said. Grace looked up. Again, he nodded. Yeah, she closed the book gently. Okay, that was all she said. But Michael picked up on something in her voice. It wasn't anger. It was more like disappointment she was trying not to show. Claire started leaving little things around the house. A sweater on the couch. A charger plugged into the kitchen wall. A toothbrush in the upstairs guest bathroom. She'd laugh it off if anyone noticed. Oh, oops, I must have left that here last time. Guess I'm just getting comfortable. She said it with a wink, but Grace could feel the way she was inching in, slowly turning her visits into something more permanent. Luke wasn't smiling anymore. He wasn't laughing at the Go Fish games or choosing between his favorite shirts. He was retreating again. Not all at once, but day by day, his spark was dimming. Grace tried to keep the routine going, but it was getting harder. Some days, Claire would take over the whole afternoon, suggesting things like a drive to the park or watching a movie in the living room with all three of them. She'd look at Luke and say, let's try something fun today, and he'd just sit there, staring at the floor. One afternoon, Claire walked into the sunroom where Grace and Luke were finishing a puzzle. She looked at them and gave a little laugh. You two always doing these quiet activities. Don't you ever do anything exciting? Grace stood up slowly. Luke likes puzzles. Claire smiled. I'm sure he does. But don't you think he needs something more stimulating? He's not a baby. Luke flinched, just slightly. Grace caught it. We're fine, she said, keeping her voice calm. Claire walked over and picked up one of the puzzle pieces, flipping it between her fingers. Just saying, I know kids. I've been around them. They need energy, playtime. Not all this soft talking and tiptoeing around. Grace's jaw tightened. Maybe try listening before deciding what he needs. Michael walked in at that exact moment. What's going on? Grace stepped back. Nothing. Claire turned with a smile. Just chatting. She walked over to him, looped her arm through his. We were just talking about how good it would be for Luke to get out more. Go places. Meet people. Maybe even get a tutor or something. Michael looked between them. He's just starting to get comfortable. Let's not push. Claire's smile dropped for half a second, but then it was back. Of course. Just thinking out loud. Grace bent down to Luke. You want to finish this later? He didn't look up, just gave the tiniest nod. That night, as Claire laughed with Michael over a glass of wine in the living room, Grace stood in the kitchen wiping the same spot on the counter over and over again. She could feel it, the shift. Something was slipping, and no one else seemed to notice. But Luke felt it, and so did she. It started slowly. Grace wasn't the type to jump to conclusions or let small things get under her skin. She'd seen enough in life to know that most things sort themselves out if you just breathe through them. But this felt different. It wasn't one thing. It was a bunch of little things piling up, creeping in from all sides until she couldn't ignore the tight feeling in her chest anymore. Something wasn't right, and no one else seemed to see it. Claire was always smiling, always saying the right thing around Michael. She laughed when she was supposed to. She complimented the decor like it mattered. She told Luke he was adorable and used a sweet voice every time she walked in the room. But Grace could feel it. It wasn't real. It was forced, thin, like someone reading lines from a play they didn't care about. She saw it in the way Claire's eyes flicked away when Luke didn't respond, or how her smile faded the second he looked down. And most of all, she saw it in Luke, the way he tensed up when Claire touched the back of his chair, the way his eyes drifted farther away every time she came close. He was slipping again, and Grace could feel it deep in her gut. One morning, Grace walked into the living room and found Claire sitting on the couch with a laptop open on the coffee table. Luke was across the room in his chair, staring at nothing. The TV was on, some loud cartoon show blasting through the speakers. Claire didn't notice Grace at first. She was texting, legs crossed, phone buzzing every few seconds. Can we turn this down? Grace asked, nodding toward the TV. Claire glanced over. He's watching it. Grace looked at Luke. Are you watching this, bud? He didn't blink, didn't move. Claire shrugged. It keeps him distracted. Grace walked over and turned the volume down herself. Claire didn't say anything, but she smiled to herself like she was keeping score. Later that day, while Grace was folding laundry upstairs, she overheard Claire on the phone in the hallway. The voice was different now. Not sweet, not polished, it was sharper. I know, but this kid barely even talks, Claire was saying. It's weird. He just stares all day. And I can't tell if he's actually listening or if the lights are just on, but nobody's home. Grace froze. Claire let out a short laugh. No, I'm serious. It's creepy. The housekeeper's always hovering around like she's his personal therapist or something. It's like, lady, calm down. He's not your kid. There was a pause. Then Claire lowered her voice. But not enough. Anyway, Michael's not stupid. He sees how much I care. I'm good for him. He's been in a dark place for way too long. I'm pulling him out of it. Grace stepped back into the room quietly and sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands were still in the towel she'd been folding, but she wasn't really holding it anymore. Her face was calm, but her heart was racing. She didn't say anything. Not then, but the unease started to grow. She noticed how Claire started showing up earlier each day, how she began picking out Luke's clothes before Grace got the chance, how she tried to change Luke's meals without asking, pushing aside his favorite oatmeal one morning and replacing it with dry cereal like a normal kid would. Eat. Michael wasn't seeing it. Or maybe he was, and didn't want to deal with it. Grace wasn't sure. What she did know was that Luke had stopped choosing what book he wanted at bedtime. He had stopped picking between shirts. He'd stopped reaching for the puzzle pieces during their afternoon games. He was shutting down again. Grace didn't want to cause a scene. She didn't want to make it about her. But every part of her was screaming that something needed to change. One night after dinner, Michael and Claire sat out on the back patio with a bottle of wine. Grace cleaned up in the kitchen and checked on Luke, who was quiet in his bed, staring at the ceiling. She sat with him for a few minutes, just holding his hand. No talking, no questions. Then she walked outside. Michael looked up when he saw her. Everything okay? Grace nodded. Can I talk to you for a second? Alone? Claire leaned back in her chair and raised an eyebrow. Michael looked between them. Right now? Yeah, Grace said. It won't take long. Claire stayed seated, waiting for Michael to say something. Finally, he stood up. Give me a minute. They walked around to the side of the house, just far enough that they couldn't be heard. Grace turned to face him. I need to say something. And I'm saying this because I care. Not because I'm trying to step on toes. Michael nodded slowly. Okay. She hesitated. Claire's not who you think she is. Michael frowned. What does that mean? She's different when you're not around. Cold. She doesn't talk to Luke like she actually sees him. It's like he's just a dot in the way. Michael rubbed his forehead. Grace, I'm serious. I heard her the other day. She was on the phone saying some ugly stuff about him. And about me. His jaw tightened. What exactly did she say? Grace looked him straight in the eyes. That he creeps her out. That I act like he's mine. That you're lucky she's around. Michael looked away for a moment. He didn't respond. I know it's not my place, she said. But Luke is pulling away again. And if you don't see that, then maybe I've been wasting my time. Michael looked back at her. You haven't been wasting your time. There was a long pause between them. She makes things feel easier, he finally said. She's not tied to the past. Grace shook her head gently. She doesn't care about the future either. Not the way it matters. He didn't have a reply. Grace stepped back. I'm not trying to make this a choice. I just needed you to hear it. Michael stood there for a moment, quiet. I'll talk to her, he said. Grace nodded once, then turned and walked back inside. That night she sat on the edge of her bed with her shoes still on. Her hands were shaking just a little. She'd never felt this off balance since she came into that house. It wasn't just about Claire. It was about Luke. It was about trust. It was about watching something good slowly unravel while everyone else pretended not to see it. And Grace had never felt more alone in that house than she did right then. It was a Sunday morning. The house was still, but not peaceful. The kind of stillness that comes after a long week where everyone's pretending things are fine, even when they're not. Grace stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, the smell of cinnamon in the air. Luke was already dressed, sitting quietly in his chair near the table, fingers resting on his lap. Claire walked in wearing a silk robe that definitely wasn't hers. She stretched like she owned the place, tossed her hair over her shoulder, and gave a tired yawn like she'd just woken up in a hotel suite. Morning, she said, voice scratchy but still trying to sound charming. Michael followed a few minutes later. He looked a little uncomfortable, but said nothing as he kissed Claire lightly on the cheek. Grace kept her head down. She plated the pancakes without saying anything and set a small stack in front of Luke, just the way he liked them. Syrup in a separate dish, fruit on the side. One of the strawberries was cut into a heart shape. She didn't mean to do that. It just happened out of habit. Claire looked at the plate, raised one eyebrow, then turned to Grace. Wow, breakfast and art. You're really going all out, huh? Grace didn't answer. Claire sat across from Luke and pulled her plate toward her, barely glancing at the food. So, what's the plan for today? She asked the room like she was asking her staff. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. I thought we could keep it low-key. Maybe hang around the house. Let Luke relax. Claire made a face. Relax? He's relaxed every day. Maybe we should get out. Do something different. She turned to Luke. Wouldn't you like that? A little adventure. There's a new zoo exhibit opening up. Elephants, lions, or maybe the aquarium. You like fish? Luke stared at his pancakes, not answering. Grace took a breath. He's had a hard week. He might not be up for a trip today. Claire didn't even look at her. She just kept her eyes on Luke. I think getting him out of this house would be good for him. Grace stepped closer. Pushing him doesn't help. Claire turned then, slowly. And for the first time, she didn't fake the smile. She looked at Grace like she was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. Her voice dropped just a little. You know, you're very... involved. For a housekeeper. Michael looked up from his coffee, his eyes darting between them. Grace didn't flinch. Someone has to be. Claire leaned back, folding her arms. He's not your child, you know. Grace's heart thudded, but her voice stayed steady. I'm aware. Luke's eyes flicked between the two women. He looked small in his chair, shoulders hunched, lips pressed together like he didn't know which way to look. Michael cleared his throat. All right, let's just... Claire cut him off. No, I'm serious. This whole routine, Grace playing super nanny, you hiding behind that, it's not healthy. You've built this little bubble and you're acting like it's normal. Grace didn't raise her voice. He needs stability, not chaos. Not sudden changes and big expectations. Claire smiled again, cold this time. What he needs is someone who treats him like a kid, not a broken project. Michael stood now, his voice firm. That's enough. Claire looked at him, feigning surprise. I'm just saying what no one else wants to say. Grace stepped away from the table. I need to check on something. She walked out before anyone could stop her. Her hands were shaking again. She went upstairs, took a few deep breaths in the hallway, then leaned against the wall, pressing her forehead against the cool paint. She didn't cry. She wanted to, but she didn't. She'd promised herself she wouldn't do that here. Not where Luke might hear her. Not where Michael might see her and feel like he had to say something he didn't mean. Downstairs, Claire was already pretending nothing had happened. She picked at her food, talked about a show she wanted to watch. Michael stayed quiet. Luke didn't eat another bite. That afternoon, Claire tried to sit with Luke in the sunroom. She brought a picture book and held it out to him like she was doing him a favor. Want to read? He turned his head away. She smiled, tight and fake. Suit yourself. She tossed the book on the table and started scrolling on her phone. Grace walked in a few minutes later with a blanket for Luke's lap. Claire didn't look up. Grace crouched beside him. Hey buddy, you okay? Luke blinked. Then, quietly, barely there, he whispered, Don't want her here. Grace felt her chest tighten. I know. She touched his hand gently, covering it with her own. Later that night, Grace passed by the hallway and saw Claire standing outside Michael's office, arms crossed. Their voices were low, but not low enough. I don't understand why you're letting her walk all over you, Claire was saying. Michael's voice came next, calmer than before. She's not walking over anyone. She's been here since the beginning. She's earned her place. Claire scoffed. You think she doesn't want more? Wake up. Grace stepped back quietly before they saw her. The next morning, Claire was gone before breakfast. No message, no goodbye, nothing. Luke ate 2 bites of his oatmeal and looked toward the hallway once, like checking to see if the coast was clear. Grace sat beside him. You did good, she said quietly. He didn't say anything, but he didn't look away. Michael came down a little later, hair still wet from the shower, looking tired. Grace met his eyes. Everything okay? He paused. She's staying at her place for a while. Said she needed space. Grace nodded once. Probably good for everyone. Michael didn't say anything after that. Just stood in the kitchen, watching his son finish breakfast without flinching. And for the first time in a while, the silence didn't feel so tense. It felt like something had cracked open. Not wide, just enough. It started small. The kind of small that's easy to miss if you're not really paying attention. But Grace always paid attention. She noticed things other people didn't. The little signs. The changes no one else saw. One morning, Luke didn't come down on his own like he'd been doing for the past couple of weeks. Usually, after she helped him get dressed, he'd wait by the sunroom or roll himself gently toward the kitchen, like he wanted to be where the day started. But that day, he just sat still. Didn't speak. Didn't move. When she asked if he wanted to go down for breakfast, he blinked twice. Slow. No, she didn't push. She helped him settle back in and brought his food upstairs. He didn't eat it. She told herself maybe he was just tired. Kids had off days. It didn't have to mean anything. But the next day was the same. Then the next. He stopped asking to play cards. Didn't pick between 2 shirts when she offered them. He wouldn't choose which book he wanted. He just stared at the window or the floor, quiet in a way that felt different now. Not peaceful, not still, withdrawn. Grace felt it like a weight pressing down on her chest. The kind of pressure that builds when something's wrong and you don't know how to fix it. It was like they were sliding backward, slowly but surely, and every attempt to pull forward only slipped through her fingers. Michael tried not to let it get to him at first, but the second he saw Luke turn his head away when he came into the room, something in him broke. They'd come so far, and now it felt like it was unraveling. One afternoon, Grace found Luke in the corner of the sunroom facing the wall, his back to the light. His hands were clenched together in his lap. She sat beside him on the floor, not saying anything at first. Then softly, You want to talk to me? No response. Did something happen? Something that didn't feel good? Still nothing. She reached for his hand gently. You can tell me anything, you know that, right? Luke didn't look at her. His mouth stayed closed, jaw tight. She tried not to let the fear show on her face, but it was there. This wasn't just sadness. This wasn't just a quiet day. This was retreat. Later that night, Grace stood in the kitchen with Michael. He was staring into the sink like there was something in there worth looking at. He's not talking again, she said quietly. Michael didn't answer. He won't even meet my eyes now, she added. Still nothing. Grace leaned against the counter. You know, it's not just about me. Something shifted. Something deeper. Michael rubbed his jaw. I know. She turned to face him. You think it's because of Claire? He exhaled hard through his nose. I don't know. Maybe. Probably. There was a long silence between them. I should have listened sooner, he said. Grace didn't say I told you so. She didn't need to. It's not too late, she said instead. But we can't just wait for him to come back this time. We have to go to him. Michael nodded slowly. The next morning they tried something new. Something small. Grace sat Luke in the living room and turned on one of the old songs he used to tap along to. She didn't talk. Just played the song and started stacking wooden blocks on the coffee table like they used to do. Michael came in and sat beside her. He picked up a block, balanced it gently on top of hers. Then another. Then another. Still no response from Luke. They kept going. After a few minutes, the tower leaned to one side and toppled with a soft clatter. Grace chuckled. Well, that one was definitely your dad's fault. Michael smirked. Excuse me? She picked up the block that fell the furthest. Only someone with zero balance could have placed this one. Michael looked at Luke. You gonna let her talk to me like that? Still nothing. Grace met Michael's eyes. She didn't say it out loud, but they both felt it. The wall was back. By the end of the week, Luke had stopped responding to the staff too. He'd let them roll him around, dress him, feed him, but he didn't react, didn't lift his hand, didn't blink twice for yes or no. It was like he was back in that first year, the year after the accident, when everything was just grey. Grace didn't sleep much that week. She kept replaying every moment, every conversation, trying to figure out where the shift happened. She knew it had started after Claire, but the part that scared her most was that maybe it had been coming all along, that maybe he was only getting better because he trusted them, and once that trust cracked, he didn't know where to go. Michael pulled away too. He spent more time in his office again, less time in the sunroom, less time at the table. He didn't want to admit it out loud, but Grace could see it, the fear that he'd broken something he couldn't fix. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Grace sat outside on the back steps with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The sky was dark, stars out, the kind of night that should feel calm but didn't. She heard the door open behind her. Michael stepped out, hands in his pockets, face tired. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "Me neither." He sat down beside her. "I feel like I lost him again," he said quietly. "You didn't lose him," Grace said. "He's just scared again." Michael stared out at the trees. "I didn't protect him. I thought I was doing the right thing, letting someone new in, letting myself move forward. But I brought someone into this house who didn't see him, who didn't even try." Grace looked down at her hands. "He trusted you," she said. "That's what made the difference. And if you want him to find his way back, he needs to feel that again. I don't even know where to start." "Then start by showing up. Sit beside him, even when he says nothing, even when he looks away. He needs to know you're not going anywhere." Michael nodded slowly. The next day, Michael didn't go to work. He didn't answer his phone. He stayed home, sat in the sunroom next to Luke, didn't talk much, just sat there, flipping through one of the picture books Grace had left nearby. He didn't read out loud, he didn't ask questions. He just turned pages, every now and then glancing over at his son. Grace came in with snacks and left them on the table without speaking. She gave Luke a soft pat on the shoulder before walking out. At some point, Luke reached out for a cracker. He didn't eat it, just held it. Michael noticed, but he didn't say anything. Later, when Grace came to check again, she found both of them asleep. Michael in the chair, Luke curled against a pillow. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it was something, and something was better than nothing. The days felt longer now, not just because Luke had gone quiet again, but because the house itself felt different, heavier, like something was sitting in the air between the walls, something unspoken. Michael had been trying. He really had. He stayed home more, sat with Luke whenever he could, even cancelled a few meetings to just be near his son. But something had shifted inside him too, and not in a way that brought him closer to anyone. He looked tired all the time, not just from lack of sleep, but from everything. Like the weight of guilt and confusion was wearing him down, and he didn't know what to do with any of it. He still said good morning, still thanked Grace for meals, still nodded when Luke blinked or moved, but there was a gap now, a space growing between what they used to be and whatever they were becoming. And Grace could feel it. It wasn't obvious. Not right away. It showed up in the way Michael walked past her without making eye contact, in the way he answered her with half words or distracted glances, in the way he sat with Luke but barely said anything, like being present was all he had left to give. It hurt more than she expected, not because she thought she was owed anything, but because she cared. Because she'd spent months giving everything she had to this house, to this boy, to the man who looked more like a ghost now than someone alive. She tried to tell herself it wasn't personal. Maybe Michael just needed space. Maybe he was sorting through things in his own way. But even if that was true, the silence between them felt too familiar, like the old days. Like before, Luke had smiled. Like before anyone in that house had dared to hope for more. One morning, Grace came downstairs to find Claire in the kitchen, just like that, sitting at the counter, sipping coffee out of one of the mugs Grace always used. Michael stood near the fridge, arms crossed, jaw tight. Grace didn't say anything right away. Claire smiled. Surprise. "I came back." Michael didn't look at Grace, not once. "I needed to talk to her," he said, his voice quiet. Claire gave him a quick look, then turned back to Grace. "We're just working some things out." Grace nodded once. Okay, she didn't ask questions. She didn't press. She walked over to the sink, rinsed off the plate she'd brought down, and put it on the rack to dry. Luke came in a few minutes later, wheeled in by one of the caregivers. He looked straight at Grace, his eyes soft but tired. She walked over and knelt beside him. "Want pancakes today?" He gave the smallest nod. Grace looked at Michael. "He's hungry." Michael nodded but still didn't look at her. Grace made the pancakes without speaking. Claire stayed at the counter, flipping through her phone, tapping her nails against the ceramic mug. When the food was ready, Grace set the plate in front of Luke and went back to cleaning. Her hands moved like they always did, calm, steady, efficient, but her chest felt tight. Claire leaned over to Luke with a forced smile. "That looks good. You gonna share?" He didn't even look at her. Grace watched from the corner of her eye. Later that day, Grace walked past Michael's office and heard Ray's voices. The door was half closed, but not enough to block the words. Claire was speaking fast, sharp. "You're not even trying anymore," Michael replied. "I'm tired. I don't want to fight with you. You don't want to deal with anything. I'm dealing with more than you know." "Well, maybe if you stopped letting that woman control the house." Grace stepped away before she could hear more. She didn't need to. She already knew what was happening. Claire was digging her claws back in. Michael was stuck in the middle. And Grace, the one who had held it all together for so long, was now on the outside. That night, dinner was quiet. Michael didn't sit at the table. Claire ate alone, scrolled through her phone, and left her plate half finished. Luke barely touched his food. Grace cleaned up in silence. When she finished, she stood at the edge of the living room, watching the two of them. Michael on the couch, Claire curled beside him, their bodies closed but their faces blank. Grace didn't recognize him anymore. Not the man who had once told her she made the house feel alive again. Not the father who sat beside his son and quietly rebuilt him piece by piece. Now he just looked tired, distant, lost. The next morning, Grace found a small bag packed in the hallway. Claire's. But it wasn't leaving, it was being unpacked. She overheard her talking to Todd, asking which room she should officially settle into. Grace said nothing, but when she went to check on Luke, she found him in bed, staring at the ceiling again. His blanket half off, his eyes red. She sat on the edge of his bed. She whispered, "I'm still here." He didn't move. She reached for his hand. He didn't pull away, but he didn't squeeze back either. It was like watching a light dim in real time. Grace stayed there for an hour. No words, no fixing, just being there. Because that was all she could do now. And even though no one said it out loud, the distance between all of them was growing faster than anyone could stop. It happened fast, like Claire had been waiting for the right moment to move her pieces. And once she started, she didn't stop. By the end of the week, she'd taken over. The house still looked the same, clean, quiet, the same furniture in the same place, but everything felt different, colder, like the rules had changed, and no one had been told except her. Michael, whether he meant to or not, had stopped questioning her. She'd started with little things, changed the grocery list without asking, tossed out Luke's favorite snacks and replaced them with organic, low-sugar options that he didn't touch. She told the gardener to trim the hedges lower because they looked too wild, even though Grace knew Luke liked watching the birds that landed in them. She moved her stuff into the guest room upstairs and started referring to it as our room whenever she spoke to Michael. He never corrected her. Grace kept her head down, but she saw it all. Every little shift, every quiet power play. Claire began suggesting changes to Luke's schedule too. One afternoon, Grace came down to find that his therapy appointment had been cancelled without notice. Claire shrugged like it was nothing. "I figured he could use a break. He doesn't seem to be improving anyway." Grace's stomach turned. She said nothing, just went back to the laundry room where no one could see her hands shaking. By the next day, Claire was sitting in on every meal. Not talking to Luke, not helping, just there, like she was staking her claim. She'd make casual remarks that stung in small ways. "I don't think we need to baby him so much," she said one morning, as Grace placed the syrup in a separate dish like always. "He's 7, Grace replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's not babying." Claire gave a quick, forced smile. "He's 7, not 2. He should be eating what everyone else eats." Luke didn't touch his food that morning. The same thing happened at lunch, and again at dinner. And when Grace tried to speak with Michael about it later, he just nodded distractedly. "She's trying to help," he said, almost to himself. Grace stared at him, searching his face for something, anything, but he didn't look up. That night, Grace stayed late in Luke's room, sitting by his side while he stared at the ceiling again. She told him a story she made up on the spot. One about a little fox who got lost in a forest, but found his way back by listening to the wind. Luke didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. The next morning, Claire stood in the kitchen with a fresh printout in her hand. She waved it like it was good news. "I found a place." Grace looked up from the sink. "What kind of place?" Claire smiled brightly. "A school. A real one. For kids with his, condition. It's got everything. Therapists, group classes, even sleeping care. They said they'd take him after a short evaluation. Grace froze. A sleeping care facility? Boarding school, Claire said, like it was obvious. He'd have more structure. He needs something different. Grace stepped forward. You're talking about sending him away. I'm talking about giving him a chance, Claire replied, still smiling. Michael agrees it could be good for him. Grace didn't even hear the rest. Her ears were ringing. She found Michael in the study that afternoon and closed the door behind her. You're not seriously considering this, she said, not even trying to hide the anger in her voice. Michael looked up, startled. What? This school? This place she found? You're not actually thinking about sending him away? Michael stood, running a hand through his hair. It's just an idea. Grace stepped closer. He's barely hanging on, and you're thinking about putting him somewhere unfamiliar, full of strangers. He's a child, Michael. Michael looked away. Claire says, I don't care what Claire says, Grace snapped. She doesn't know him. She doesn't want to know him. She's trying to help. No, Grace said. She's trying to clear the space. She wants less mess, less noise, less reality. Michael's shoulders dropped. I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know what's right. Then look at your son, Grace said, her voice soft now. Actually, look at him. He's scared. He's shutting down again. And you're letting her make the decisions that should come from you. Michael looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't. His eyes fell to the floor. Grace stepped back. You need to remember who you were before she came. She walked out before he could reply. Later that evening, Claire found Grace in the hallway outside Luke's room. She didn't smile this time. You don't get to question me, she said, her voice low. I'm not questioning you, Grace said, calmly. I'm protecting him. Claire laughed once. You think you're the only one who cares. You're the help. You clean floors. You fold towels. You don't make decisions. Grace's face didn't change. I make them when no one else will. Claire stepped closer. Watch yourself. Grace didn't flinch. You first. The hallway stayed silent after that. Luke's door was still cracked open. His eyes were open too, and he'd heard every word. Grace hadn't planned on it. She wasn't snooping. She wasn't the type to eavesdrop or sneak around. But when you work in a house long enough, you start hearing things. Not because you're trying to, just because you're there. It was late. The kind of late where most people were already in bed and the house had that quiet stillness that only shows up when everything else is done for the day. Grace had come downstairs to grab a glass of water. She was barefoot, hair tied up, just trying to shake the heaviness of another hard day. She passed the kitchen and heard Claire's voice. Not loud, but sharp. Listen, I've already done more than I planned to, Claire was saying. I've put in my time. I've played nice, but I'm not babysitting this mute kid for the rest of my life. Grace froze. The voice was coming from the living room, just around the corner. She leaned back against the wall, holding her breath. Claire's voice dropped, but not enough. The only reason I'm still here is because Michael's finally starting to let go of the dead wife and that pathetic housemaid. You should see the way he follows me around now. He's wrapped. It's just a matter of time. There was a pause, then laughter. Cold, forced. No, he hasn't asked me to move in officially yet, but trust me, it's coming. He's too broken to push back. He's looking for someone to save him, and I'm giving him just enough to keep him hooked. Grace stood frozen in the hallway. Her hand was tight around her glass. I swear, Claire said with a low chuckle, if I have to listen to that woman read another bedtime story like she's Mother Teresa, I'm gonna scream. It's exhausting pretending to care about a kid who doesn't even talk. And every time I try to be real, she pops up like some saint in sneakers. It's pathetic. The words hit Grace in the chest like a punch, hard and fast and sharp. Claire kept going. Oh, and get this. She actually thinks Michael needs her. It's hilarious. Like she's not replaceable. Please, the second I get him to put a ring on it, she's gone. Gone. Grace backed away slowly. She didn't want to hear more. She went upstairs, but not to bed. Her heart was pounding. Her head was spinning. The glass was still in her hand, and she didn't even notice until it started shaking. She sat on the edge of her bed for what felt like hours. She wasn't shocked by the words. Not really. She'd felt it. She'd seen it. But hearing it, really hearing it, made it impossible to ignore. She wanted to walk. She could pack a bag right now, leave before the sun came up. She had enough money saved to figure things out for a while. She had friends in the next town. She'd survived worse. But Luke, his face came to her immediately. His quiet eyes. The way he leaned toward her when he was scared. The way he blinked twice for yes, once for no. The way he smiled, crooked and small, when she said something silly just for him. She couldn't leave him with her. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, Grace came downstairs like usual. Same soft steps, same tied back hair, same steady face. But inside, everything felt different. Claire was already in the kitchen, pouring herself a coffee like she owned the house. She looked up when she saw Grace, but didn't say anything. Grace didn't either. Luke came in a few minutes later, rolled in by one of the aides. He looked up at Grace. She looked right back at him. Something passed between them, a quiet understanding. Michael walked in soon after, rubbing the back of his neck, half awake. "Morning," he said. Claire walked over and kissed his cheek. "Hey, babe." Grace barely heard it. She was focused on Luke. She crouched beside him. "Want pancakes?" Luke gave the smallest nod. She smiled. "Okay." She made them slowly, her hands moving on autopilot while her head spun. Claire leaned against the counter, scrolling on her phone. She didn't even glance up when she said, "By the way, Michael, we should talk about getting Luke a proper schedule. Something more firm. Structure helps, right?" Grace said nothing, but Michael looked at her now, and he didn't like what he saw in her face. He waited until after breakfast. When Claire had stepped outside to take a call, Michael found Grace in the laundry room. She was folding towels, calm as ever, but her eyes were red. "Is something going on?" he asked gently. Grace didn't answer at first. He stepped closer. "Grace." She looked at him, really looked at him. "You need to hear something." He waited. So she pulled out her phone and hit play. It was the voice recording she made last night. She hadn't planned to record it. Her phone had been in her pocket when she passed the room. Some part of her hit the button without thinking. Now Claire's voice filled the small space, cutting through the air like a knife. Michael's face changed almost instantly. His mouth parted, his eyebrows pulled together, and he took a step back like the sound had hit him physically. He listened all the way through. No interruptions. When it ended, the room stayed quiet. Grace said, "That's who she really is." Michael was speechless. He sat down on the edge of the washer, staring at the floor. Grace folded one more towel. Her voice was calm, but tired. "I don't care what happens to me, but if you let us stay in this house one more day, Luke is the one who will pay for it." Michael looked up, eyes full. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? You wouldn't have heard me." He didn't argue. He knew she was right. That night, Claire came into the living room laughing at something on her phone. Michael was sitting there, waiting. "We need to talk," he said. She froze. And just like that, the whole game changed. Luke's 8th birthday came on a Tuesday. It wasn't supposed to be a big thing. Grace had asked Michael what the plan was, and he just said, "Let's keep it small, quiet, just us." That sounded right. Luke didn't like loud surprises. He didn't like being the center of attention, not anymore. What he did like was pancakes shaped like stars, balloons tied to the back of his chair, and chocolate cake with no frosting. So that's what Grace planned. She woke up early and started cooking in the kitchen while the house was still quiet. The pancake batter was already resting in the fridge. She made it the night before and hid it behind the milk, just in case Claire saw it and decided to change the plan. She didn't want anyone rearranging this day. This day wasn't about anyone else. It was for Luke. Michael came down around 8 o'clock. Hair messy, hoodie on. He looked tired but softer than he had in days. "Need help?" he asked. Grace just smiled and handed him a whisk. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. The house smelled like cinnamon and blueberries, and for a moment, it felt warm again. At 8:30, Grace wheeled Luke into the kitchen. She'd tied a small balloon to the arm of his chair. Blue, his favorite color. When he saw the pancakes shaped like stars on his plate, something flickered behind his eyes. A small light. Not quite a smile, but close. Grace leaned down beside him. "Happy birthday, buddy." Luke looked at her, blinked twice. "Thank you." That was enough for her. Claire walked in a little later, heels clicking, hair done, dressed like she was heading to a gallery opening, not a child's birthday breakfast. She looked around the kitchen like she'd just walked into someone else's party. "Oh," she said, frowning. "I didn't know we were doing all this." Michael looked up. "It's his birthday." She smiled too late. "Right, I know. Just thought we were keeping it simple." Grace didn't say anything. She turned back to the stove and kept flipping pancakes. Claire leaned against the counter, watching. "Well, I brought him something." She reached into a fancy bag and pulled out a remote control helicopter. Black and silver, sleek and complicated. It looked expensive, way too advanced for Luke, especially for a kid who hadn't smiled in weeks and could barely use both hands at once on a good day. She held it out to him. "Look at this, Luke. You're gonna love it." Luke didn't reach for it. His eyes dropped to his plate. Claire stepped closer. "What? Don't like it?" Grace turned around slowly. He might need a minute. Claire laughed under her breath. He always needs a minute, doesn't he? Michael looked up from his coffee. Claire kept going. I swear, I try, but I get nothing. He won't even make eye contact. Luke's hand clenched around his fork. Grace walked over. Maybe let him wake up before we throw toys in his face. Claire's tone changed. Just a little. Sharper. I'm just trying to include him. Sorry if that's not your style. Michael stood now. Claire. But Luke moved suddenly, knocking over his juice by accident. The glass tipped, spilling all over the table. Some of it ran into his plate, soaking the pancakes and dripping off the edge. Everyone froze. Claire stepped back and let out a loud sigh. Oh, for God's sake. She grabbed a towel off the counter and stomped toward him. Seriously? You're 8. You can't even hold a cup? Luke shrank in his chair, his shoulders curled in. His head dropped. Do you even try? Claire snapped. Or are we all just supposed to clean up after you like you're a toddler forever? Grace didn't move at first. Then she did. She stepped between them, calm but firm, her voice low. That's enough. Claire blinked. Excuse me? You don't talk to him like that, Grace said, standing tall now. Claire laughed, but it was cold. I'm sorry, are you in charge of this house now? I don't care who's in charge, Grace said, voice shaking now. You don't speak to a child like that. Not today. Not ever. Michael was frozen, still watching, still trying to figure out what to say. Claire crossed her arms. He needs structure, discipline, not this coddling. He's never going to get better if we treat him like a broken doll. Grace stepped closer. He's not a doll, and he's not broken. He's hurt, and he needs love, not you. Claire opened her mouth, ready to fire back, but then it happened. Luke let out a small sound, a whimper, barely there. Then the tears came, silent, slow, sliding down his cheeks. He didn't cry loudly. He didn't sob. He just sat there, shaking and crying like his body didn't know what else to do. Grace dropped to her knees beside him instantly, cupping his face gently. Hey, you're okay. You didn't do anything wrong. I've got you. Michael stepped forward, finally snapping out of whatever fog he was in. He crouched on the other side of Luke. I'm here, buddy. I'm right here. Claire stood frozen, watching them like she didn't understand what was happening. After a few seconds, she turned and walked out without saying a word. Grace wiped Luke's tears with the sleeve of her sweater, her hand soft on the back of his neck. You're okay, she whispered again. We're here. You're not alone. Michael didn't say much, but his hand stayed on Luke's arm the whole time. The kitchen stayed quiet for a long time after that. The pancakes went cold, the gift sat unopened on the counter. The balloon floated gently above them, and Luke kept crying. Because sometimes birthdays don't feel like celebrations. Sometimes they're just reminders of who's missing, and who you can really trust to stay. Grace didn't plan to explode. That morning all she wanted was for things to go quietly. Luke had cried himself to sleep the night before, and when she checked on him early in the morning, his eyes were still puffy, his stuffed fox clutched tight against his chest. He didn't say anything when she sat beside him on the edge of the bed, but he didn't pull away either. He just let her be there. That was something. Downstairs, the house felt tense. Nobody said it out loud, but the silence had weight. Claire didn't show her face during breakfast. Michael made coffee but didn't drink it. Grace made eggs for Luke, but he barely touched them. It was like the birthday incident was still echoing through the house, loud in ways nobody wanted to admit. Around mid-morning, Claire finally walked into the sunroom like nothing had happened. Sunglasses on, phone in hand, iced coffee in the other. She wore white, like she always did when she wanted to look clean and composed. She didn't greet Luke, didn't even glance at him. She looked at Grace instead. Has Michael gone out? Grace didn't answer. Claire took off her glasses, annoyed. I asked you a question. Grace turned toward her slowly, her hands still wrapped around a blanket she was folding. He's upstairs. Claire crossed her arms. Okay, well, when he comes down, let him know I want to talk to him. Grace nodded once and turned back to what she was doing, but Claire didn't move. She just stood there. Finally, she said, You know, if you really cared about this family, you'd stay in your place. Grace froze. Claire walked further into the room. You think you've done something special, don't you? Playing house. Acting like you belong here. Like you're some kind of savior. Grace slowly turned to face her. Claire kept going. I see the way you look at him. You want him to choose you. You think being quiet and patient and sweet makes you better than me, but I'm the one he let into his life. You're just the help. That word sat in the air like a slap. Luke flinched in his chair. Grace stepped toward Claire. Calm. Not angry yet. But getting there. You want to talk about roles? Grace said quietly. Let's talk about yours. You walk into this house pretending to care about a little boy you barely look at, unless someone's watching. You parade around like this place is your playground, and then you treat the most vulnerable person here like he's a burden, Claire scoffed. He is a burden. Look at him. Grace's whole body went still. Luke looked down, trying to make himself small. That's when Grace snapped. She stepped right in front of Claire, voice steady but shaking with rage. Don't you ever say that again? Claire laughed bitterly. Why not? Someone has to. You think pity's going to fix him? You think your stories and soft voices are enough to bring back the kid he used to be? He's still that kid, Grace said, louder now. He's still here. He just needs to feel safe. Claire raised her eyebrows. Safe? With you? Yes, Grace said. With me. Because unlike you, I don't give up on people when they stop being convenient. Claire's face twisted. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, Grace said, eyes locked on hers. I know you came here looking for a man who'd make you feel important. Not a child, not a family. Just money, comfort, control. And when Luke didn't fit into that picture, you started tearing him down. You're not his mother, Claire spat. You're right, Grace said, her voice catching. I'm not, but I love him like I am, and I will protect him like one. Claire opened her mouth, but before she could speak again, a voice cut in from the doorway. It was Michael. He'd heard everything. He stepped into the room slowly, eyes dark, mouth tight. Grace, he said softly. She turned, surprised. Then he looked at Claire and his face changed completely. I want you out of this house. Claire blinked. What? You heard me. You can't be serious. She laughed, panicked now. Because of her? Michael walked forward. No. Because of you. Because of what I've let happen. Because I saw my son cry on his birthday and couldn't figure out why until I heard what you really think. Claire's face twisted. You're choosing them over me? I'm choosing my son, Michael said. And I should have done it a long time ago. Claire shook her head, stepping back like the room was closing in on her. You don't know what you're doing. I do now, Michael said. Pack your things. Claire looked at Grace, venom in her eyes. Then she looked at Michael again, trying one last time. You're going to regret this. He didn't blink. No. I regret not doing it sooner. Claire stood there a second longer, then turned on her heel and stormed out. The room stayed quiet. Luke was still frozen in his chair. Michael walked over, knelt in front of him. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Luke looked at him, and then, finally nodded. Michael let out a breath like he'd been holding it for months. Grace walked over and placed a hand gently on Luke's shoulder. We've got you, she said. You're safe now. No one moved for a while. They didn't need to. Because for the first time in a long time, Luke believed it. The front door clicked shut behind Claire. No one spoke. Michael stood still in the middle of the living room, like his mind hadn't caught up with his body yet. His hands were in fists at his sides, jaw locked tight, eyes unfocused. Grace was beside Luke, still crouched near his chair, one hand gently resting on his shoulder. Luke hadn't moved much, but his eyes stayed on Michael now, wide and careful, like he wasn't sure what would come next. Michael slowly walked toward them, his shoes soft against the hardwood. When he got close, he knelt in front of Luke, just like he had earlier, and lowered his voice. I'm sorry, he said, almost a whisper, for everything. Luke blinked once, then looked away. Grace stayed quiet. Michael turned toward her. I didn't see it. Grace didn't look angry. She just looked tired. You did, she said softly. You just didn't want to. He let out a breath and sat back on the floor, legs folded under him. I thought she'd help me feel normal again, he admitted. Like if I could just move on, if I could have someone by my side. Maybe everything else would start to make sense again. Grace said nothing. Michael rubbed his hands over his face. But it wasn't about her. It never was. I wasn't trying to build something new. I was trying to hide from what was already broken. Luke watched him now. Quiet, still, but watching. I thought if I made the right moves, played the part, stayed in control, I could protect him. I could keep him from falling any further. He looked at his son. But I wasn't protecting you, was I? Luke didn't respond. Michael leaned closer. You were hurting right in front of me and I didn't even see it. Grace's hand tightened gently on Luke's shoulder. I saw the signs, Michael said, more to himself now. The way he pulled away, and the way you stepped in when I couldn't, I just kept hoping it would pass. Like things would fix themselves if I stayed out of the way. Grace finally spoke. He needed you. Michael nodded. I wasn't there. Not really. They stayed like that for a while. All three of them. No movement, no forced words. Just sitting in the aftermath of everything that had built up and finally snapped. Then Michael did something he hadn't done in a long time. He reached for Luke's hand. It was slow, careful. He didn't force it, just opened his palm and let it rest there, waiting. Luke looked at it. Then, after a few seconds, placed his own hand into his father's. Michael closed his eyes. Grace looked away, just for a second, to keep from showing how much that small thing meant. Later that day, Michael sat with Grace at the kitchen table. The rest of the house was quiet. Luke was upstairs with a coloring book Grace had given him earlier. He hadn't said anything, but he'd picked blue crayons, which Grace took as a good sign. Michael didn't touch his coffee. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said. Grace watched him. I know. I didn't mean to push you away. I know that too. He looked up. You held this family together. Not me. Grace didn't smile. We all did our part. But yeah, I did a lot of it. Michael leaned back in the chair. He looked older now, not in a bad way, just in a way that made him seem more honest. Like something in him had stopped pretending. I never thanked you, he said. You don't have to. I do. He looked at her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time in weeks. Not just the helper. Not just the one who made breakfast and read bedtime stories. The woman who had stood by when things fell apart. The woman who had carried more than anyone asked her to. You didn't have to stay, he said. But you did. Grace leaned forward, arms resting on the table. He needed me. Michael shook his head. I needed you. She looked at him. Something passed between them. Nothing loud or romantic or dramatic, just something honest. Then she looked down. So what now? Michael didn't answer right away. I don't know, he said. But I know I'm not letting someone else decide what's best for my son. Not anymore. Grace nodded. That was enough for now. Later that evening, Michael knocked softly on Luke's door before walking in. Luke was still coloring, his head bent over the page. Michael sat on the floor beside him. I missed your last birthday, he said quietly. Luke kept coloring, but his hand slowed a little. Not because I wasn't here, but because I wasn't really here. You needed me, and I wasn't there. Luke didn't look up, but his hand stopped moving. I'm here now, Michael whispered. I promise. He didn't expect a reaction. Not right away, but then Luke picked up the blue crayon, turned the page, and slid the book a little closer toward his dad. Michael took a deep breath, picked up the green crayon, and started coloring the sky. Grace stood in the hallway, just outside the door. She didn't go in. She didn't need to. Michael had finally stepped up, and Luke was letting him in. The next few days were quiet, but for once, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt needed. Like everyone was finally breathing again after holding it in for too long. Claire was gone. The tension she'd brought into the house had disappeared with her. Nobody said her name. Nobody asked where she went. Nobody wanted to. Luke stayed close to his room, not because he was shutting down, but because he was watching, listening, processing. You could feel it. He wasn't afraid anymore, just cautious. Testing the air. Checking if the calm would last. Grace kept the routine steady. Breakfast, sunroom, a little reading, some fresh air when the weather allowed. She didn't push. She didn't change anything. She just let Luke come back at his own pace. Michael followed her lead. He didn't go back to work right away. He moved slower now, more present. Every morning he sat beside Luke at the table. He didn't try to fill the silence or ask too many questions. He just sat there, sipping his coffee and letting his son know he was there. That mattered more than anything else. On Thursday morning, something small happened. Grace was setting the table. Luke was already seated, eyes on the window. Michael walked in, carrying a bowl of cut fruit. He placed it in front of Luke and said, No strawberries, just how you like it. Luke looked at the bowl, then looked at his dad, then blinked twice. Michael froze. Grace looked up from across the kitchen. Michael swallowed. Was that a yes? Luke blinked twice again. Michael's voice cracked. Okay, buddy. He turned away quickly and pretended to reach for a napkin, but Grace saw him wipe his eyes. Later that day, Grace and Michael stood in the hallway after putting Luke down for a nap. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For teaching me how to slow down. Grace gave a small smile. It's not hard. Just stop trying so hard. He laughed under his breath. So that might be the hardest part. She shrugged. It's worth it. They didn't say much else. They didn't need to. That afternoon, Grace set up a small painting station in the sunroom. Just watercolors, paper, and some soft music playing in the background. She left it there without saying a word. Around 3, Luke wheeled himself over and started dipping the brush into blue. Grace watched from the hallway, arms crossed, her heart full. The next day, Michael sat beside Luke during his afternoon reading time. I used to read with your mum, he said, picking up one of the old books. Luke looked at him. She had this voice, soft but Kinda goofy. She did the voices. You would laugh so hard when she did the dragon one. Remember that? Luke blinked. Michael smiled. I miss her too. He didn't push. He just opened the book and started reading. His voice wasn't as smooth. He didn't do the voices. But he kept going. Page after page. Luke didn't interrupt, but he listened. Grace watched from the doorway again. She'd started doing that more lately, staying in the background, letting the two of them find their way back to each other without her being in the middle of it. That night, after dinner, Michael found her in the laundry room folding towels. Again. You're always folding something, he said, leaning against the door frame. Grace smirked. You're always pacing in doorways. He chuckled. Fair. He stepped inside, quiet for a second. Can I ask you something? She nodded. Why'd you stay? Grace's hands slowed. She set the towel down. Because I saw something in him, she said. Even when he went quiet, even when he disappeared inside himself, I knew he wasn't gone, just hiding. Michael looked down. And me? She didn't answer right away. You were trying, she said finally. Even when you got it wrong. Michael leaned against the dryer, arms crossed. You kept this house going, he said. I wouldn't have known how to raise him without you. Grace shook her head. You didn't need me to raise him. You just needed time to remember how to be there. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something so simple, so soft, it nearly broke her. I'm scared I'll mess it up again. Grace looked him in the eye. Then don't walk away this time. That's it. That's all he needs. Show up. Stay. Michael nodded, like he was hearing it for the first time. The next morning, Luke came down and went straight to the table before anyone called him. He looked at the pancakes, reached for the fork himself, and took the first bite without waiting. Grace and Michael just looked at each other. No words, but both smiling. The trust was coming back, not all at once, but piece by piece. And this time they were holding onto it with both hands. The days had been peaceful. Too peaceful. That's how Grace knew trouble was coming back. It was the lull before a storm. Luke was smiling more. He asked for things again. He turned pages. He even laughed softly when Grace told him a silly joke. Michael stayed close. He helped with lunch. He wheeled Luke outside. The house felt like a home again. Then one evening, Claire knocked. Grace was in the kitchen rinsing dishes. Luke was upstairs reading. Michael was in his office working late. The front door had been locked. Grace froze when she heard the knock, stiffening mid-motion. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked slowly toward the front door. Her heart beat too fast. She peeked through the peephole. Claire was there, standing under the porch light in a dark red coat, hood down, eyes hollow in the dim glow. Grace opened the door just a crack. Hey, Claire, she said softly. Claire's lips curved faintly. I need to talk to Michael. Grace's jaw clenched. He's not here. She'd hoped Claire would turn away, go back to wherever she'd gone. She hoped that more than anything. Claire pushed the door a little wider. I can't leave like this. Not without closure. Grace didn't step aside. She held the door steady. We don't need closure. We need peace. Claire stepped forward anyway, ignoring Grace's body. You don't understand what's at stake. Grace shook her head. I understand more than you ever will. Claire's eyes flicked inside through the doorway. Let me just say a few words. Then I'll go. Grace didn't answer. She stepped aside, tight and controlled. Claire crossed the threshold and shut the door behind her. Inside, the house felt suddenly too big. Claire's presence sucked the air. She waited in the hallway. The silence was thick. Grace backed up, arms folded. I'm sorry it ended like that, Claire said, soft voice. I tried to make it work. Grace's heart pounded. Tried? This house, this boy, they were never part of your plan except as an accessory. Claire's eyes flicked to the staircase. You think I was happy leaving? You think this was easy for me? Grace felt her fingers quake. Then don't make it harder. Claire moved toward the stairs. I need you to tell him I care, that I thought I was doing the best. Grace cut her off. You thought you were doing what was easiest for you. Claire's face hardened. You think I left because I wanted to? You think I wanted to walk away from someone who needed me? Grace looked at her defiant. I know you left because this was never yours to stay. Claire took a deep breath. I'm tired of running, she said. I just wanted to understand what I destroyed. The house stayed silent. Then from upstairs, Luke's voice, quieter than usual, but steady. Dad? Michael appeared in the stairwell. His eyes were tired but sharp. Claire, he said. She turned to him. Michael, just hear me out. I made mistakes. Big ones. I don't expect acceptance. I just want you to know I never meant to hurt Luke. Michael's face didn't soften, but his voice stayed calm. You did more than hurt him. You almost broke him again. Claire bit her lip. I see that now. But Grace moved past her toward Michael. You don't need her words. You have ours. Luke was wheeled down then, slow steps. Eyes wide, he stopped at the base of the stairs. He looked at Claire, at Michael, at Grace. His face showed cautious wonder. Claire's eyes filled. "Luke," she whispered. He didn't move. Claire swallowed. "I'm sorry," she said again. "I wish I could fix this. I know I can't, but I'm sorry." The room held its breath. Michael let out a low sound. He looked at Claire, at Luke, at Grace. He shook his head. "No," he said. "Staying would have been a choice. You chose to leave instead. And you crossed lines you can't uncross." Claire closed her eyes, tears slipping. I know. I'm sorry." Then she turned and walked out. She passed Grace without speaking. She gave one look at Luke, then opened the front door, stepped into the night, and slammed it behind her. Michael stood there. The echo of the slam hung in the hallway. Luke looked at him. He didn't say anything. Michael wheeled himself toward Luke, crouched down, put his hand on Luke's chair. "You okay?" he asked softly. Luke nodded once. Grace stood behind them. Her face was calm, but her eyes glistened. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He sat in the living room in the dark. Grace joined him quietly. They didn't say anything. They just sat and let the quiet wash over them again. But this time, it felt guarded, protected. In the days that followed, Claire's shadow lingered. Staff whispered speculation. Grace locked the doors. Michael changed passwords. Luke asked fewer questions about what had happened. He watched from the side, absorbing everything again carefully. But something had changed. The presence of tension itself had returned, just in balance this time, rather than domination. They would have to rebuild the peace again. They'd have to guard it, nurture it, keep something real alive. Because trouble had returned. But now they were stronger. Now they were ready. The morning sun came soft through the windows. Birds outside sang. But inside the house, Grace carried a weight she'd held in her bones for years. It was time. The secret she'd kept, the part of her past she never let anyone touch, would come out, because things had gotten too raw, too real. And if she didn't tell Michael before he drifted away too, she'd lose her chance. Michael was downstairs in the study, working as usual. Luke was in the sunroom doing a puzzle. Grace stood across the hallway, shoes off, socks pulled to her knees. She inhaled deeply. She walked forward into the study, closing the door behind her. Michael looked up. "You said you wanted to talk." Grace sat in the chair opposite him. She didn't smile. She didn't shift. She just faced him. "I have something I need to tell you," she began softly. Michael leaned forward. "Okay. Whatever it is." She closed her eyes for a second. "Before I came here, I had a son." Michael blinked. Grace swallowed hard. "I lost custody. It was a messy divorce. My ex accused me of neglect, said I wasn't stable enough to care for him. The court believed it. They removed him from my home. I fought, I pleaded, but I lost." Michael's expression shifted. Surprise. Confusion. Something else. Pain. Grace continued. "I haven't told anyone. Not because I was ashamed, because I was afraid. Afraid it would change what you think of me. Afraid you'd see me as damaged." She paused. Her voice cracked. "But when I came here and met Luke, he was living the life I once tried to protect. He was close to losing himself. I couldn't walk away. Not after seeing that. I didn't want to be the one who ran again." Michael didn't speak. Grace's hands rested in her lap, fingers trembling slightly. "I didn't want to burden you. I didn't want you to think I was hiding something." She looked up. "When I stayed, when I fought for him, and for us, part of me was fighting for myself too, to be worthy, to prove that I could protect someone and not fail." Michael stared. His eyes were distant. The words pressed into the air. After a long moment, he said, "Your son, is he okay?" Grace nodded, voice quiet. "He's with his dad now. He's older. I don't see him often. I tried once, but it was too hard. Too many memories." Michael sat back, trying to absorb it. The man who had stood strong, who had refused to admit shame, now sat silent. Luke's footsteps approached outside. The puzzle pieces snapped. Michael looked at the door. Luke rolled in and paused in the doorway. He glanced between them. Grace swallowed. She stood. "Luke, But Michael held up a hand. He stepped forward and smoothed Grace's hair back from her face, gentle. Knelt down to Luke. "Hey, buddy." Luke looked at him, uneasy. Michael said to Grace, "Thank you for telling me." Grace tried to speak, but tears filled her eyes. She nodded. Michael turned to Luke, voice soft. "Sometimes people carry things they don't talk about. But we still love them. Always." He held out his hand. Luke stared. Grace stood behind, watching. She didn't move. Luke slowly reached and placed his hand in Michael. Michael smiled, quiet. Michael stood, tall now. He turned to Grace. "You don't have to prove anything to me. Not ever." Grace's shoulders shook. She looked at him, then at Luke. Her secret had been heavy, but now the weight was shared. The house was quiet, but inside that quiet, something shifted. Something real and strong. The afternoon light spilled into Michael's study in long slants, dust motes dancing in the air. Grace stood near the door, waiting. Luke was in the sunroom, doing quiet work with his pencils. Michael sat behind his desk, looking tired but steady. He held an envelope in his hands. It was thick. He had stayed late to read it, though the words would change everything. He looked up at Grace. His voice was low. The DNA test came back. Grace's breath caught. She nodded. I know. Michael opened the envelope further. I asked them to also run any prior records, any possibility. He swallowed. It confirms what the adoption papers hinted at. Grace's eyes filled. She stood still. Michael laid out more papers. Emily, before she married me, before we knew each other, adopted a child. A baby whose birth mother had legal troubles. She brought him into her life and never told me. Grace's heart pounded. Michael continued, voice soft. That child is Luke. Grace's face blurred. Michael's hands shook slightly as he held one of the documents. All these years I thought I was rescuing him. Thought you came in and healed him. But Emily already loved him. She named him, raised him, until she died. Grace closed her eyes. Everything in her head turned. Michael took a breath. I didn't know. The lawyers sealed it. Only recently, when I asked for Claire's files and legal responses, I found the old adoption paperwork. The name Grace gave, the hospital records, they match. Luke's footsteps echoed. He rolled into the room, chair soft on the rugs. He looked at them. Michael stood and walked toward him. Luke, I know this is a lot to take in. Grace stood behind him, hands trembling. Michael knelt. Luke, you've always been mine. Emily's love, your first. Grace's love, the care you felt when you thought she was just someone helping, that was real too. She didn't know what she was walking into, but she stayed because she knew you. Luke looked between Michael and Grace, his eyes wide. Grace crouched as well. Luke, I never told you because I was afraid you might hate me for hiding. But I love you too. All I ever wanted was for you to feel seen, to feel safe. Luke's voice was small. Mum? Silence fell. Michael swallowed hard. Yes. Yes, she is. Grace's tears fell, quiet and long. Michael wrapped her gently, as much for comfort as for union. Luke sat between them, stunned, not sure what to do or say. Grace reached out and took his hand. He didn't move away. Outside, the wind rustled leaves. The house felt alive, heavy, vulnerable, open. Michael stood and walked to Grace. He looked at her, his eyes fierce and soft. I was blind for a long time. I was trying to build something new, but I ignored what was already here, because I was scared to lose everything. Grace shook her head. You've never lost him, and I never meant to take his place. I just wanted to be someone he could trust when no one was left. Michael nodded. You became more than I deserved. Luke wheeled himself forward. He looked at Grace, then at Michael. Then he closed his eyes and whispered, Thank you. Grace ran her fingers along Luke's hair. You have nothing to thank me for. Just stay. Michael came close. He put his hand on Luke's shoulder and Grace's back. Together the three of them stood in that room. The sun moved. The papers on Michael's desk fluttered gently. Dust motes drifted. Outside the study door, Grace and Michael had each other's hands. Luke sat in front of them, not asking more, not speaking yet, but connected. All the secrets, all the pain, all the absence. They didn't disappear. They would have scars. But the final truth brought them closer than any lie could separate them. And Grace, the quiet woman who came to bring light, had not only healed Luke, she had become his mother in every way that mattered. In the hush, Michael whispered, Welcome home.